Hello, 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 everyone. Remakes here, and I'm doing something a little bit different today related to Dragon Quest. And I'm kind of doing a reaction video, which is not something that I'm well known for. I don't really do those. But people have asked me about this particular video, which is James Rolfe's take on the Dragon Quest series. And this was put out a little more than a year ago. So it came out February of last year, and I remember watching it when it was new and liking the video as a big Dragon Quest fan and as a fan of Mr. Rolfe's work. But I don't really remember much of it other than the parts that I found particularly amusing, which was where he was mispronouncing certain words. And, what's funny is this isn't even me as like a Dragon Quest fan saying, you don't know how to say Kafrizzle or whatever. It was like regular English words. One of them was a name and the other was a regular English word. And they weren't really all that uncommon, so I thought it was kind of funny. But people ask me about this because I'm such a big Dragon Quest fan and I do watch Cinemassacre. And they said, well, what do you think of the video that James Rolfe made about Dragon Quest? It got a lot of people really kind of, interested. And, people have asked me for my thoughts on it a few times. So I figured I'd do a video where I just watch the whole thing and sort of react to it. I'm going to be pausing a lot to talk about things, probably. I haven't seen this since last February when it came out. So, like I said, I only really remember the two things about it. I do believe there's a sponsorship in it as well, which I will skip over, which was for Dragon Quest Tact, a mobile game that was new at the time. I don't know if it's still around. I didn't really play very much of it. I know they closed down Dragon Quest to the stars. So just give you a little bit of background on my history with the Dragon Quest series. I'm a big fan. It's my favorite series. It's been around since the mid 80s, and I first played Dragon Quest when it was called Dragon Warrior on the NES. There were 4 of them: Dragon Warrior 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they didn't come out with any after that. It was like, oh well, I guess that's over with. It was a thing that was on the NES, and then years later on the PlayStation is Dragon Warrior 7, and we're like, whoa, okay, what happened there, and then the next game was Dragon Quest 8. By the time Dragon Quest 8 came out, I was a little more familiar. I knew that Dragon Warrior and Dragon Quest were the same thing. I had played 5, so I kind of knew a little bit more at that point. Since then, I've played all the major games, all the numbered games except for 10, which was never released in America, and it is an online game, so it's not like, you can just get like some translation patch and play through it, And it's still an ongoing thing. They just released like revision 6, I think. And I played a lot of the spin-offs too. So we're going to go over James's video. Like I said, I'm going to pause a bunch to talk about certain things and just see how his experience mirrors mine and whatnot. So here we go.
I was familiar with the Dragon Warrior series.
So that's Dragon Warrior 4 right there with the Zenithian sword on the cover. That was the last one on the NES.
Because I've seen them in Nintendo Power magazines and in the local video store.
Wow, did he just like go on Google image search and go for like and just type in video store 80s? Look at that. Wow.
But I never picked them up. I was more into Zelda and other games at the time.
Now, it's interesting, like everybody was kind of like into Zelda and whatnot, but it's interesting that he never played a Dragon Warrior game back in the day because if you had a subscription to Nintendo Power, this is why Dragon Quest 1 or Dragon Warrior 1 was such a huge hit in the United States, as well as, it was way bigger in Japan, but 1 in particular sold really well in the United States, which is probably why we even did get 2, 3, and 4. Which had diminishing returns. 4 didn't sell very well at all. But, there was a whole promotion where, hey, subscribe to this magazine, Nintendo Power, and not only do you get, 12 issues, but you get a free game. And it didn't even matter what it was. Like Dragon Warrior, that sounds cool, whatever, right? Just give me a free game. Because games cost like $60 to $80, so it was like, oh, well, So a lot of people got it that way. That's not how I got it. Actually, my uncle had it, and he was like, you got to check out this game, and I went to his house and played it there for the first time. That's how I first experienced Dragon Quest 1.
30 years later, there's 11-something entries in the main series, plus
11-something
bonus games. It's really daunting to get into them all of a sudden.
It should be mentioned, it's Final Fantasy. It should be mentioned that he put out this video, it was before they announced Dragon Quest 12, so.
It's like jumping into Final Fantasy, never playing one before.
Well, it's actually really easy to jump into either, and people have asked me many times if you want to jump into Dragon Quest, which game should I play first? And I always tell them, it doesn't matter, really, just play like whatever one you get your hands on. Despite having, like trilogies and overarching storylines for some of them, like the Erdrick trilogy or the Zenithian trilogy, they're all pretty well self-contained. And Final Fantasy is even more so, that they're all completely self-contained. As a matter of fact, in this image, the only one here that isn't completely self-contained is this one right here, Final Fantasy X-2, which is a sequel to this one. But every single one of these, they're in an interesting order because like there's 1, there's 2, 3 is over here. It's just kind of a weird order, but there you have it.
Where do you start? What's the story like? How does it all connect? I sat down.
Well, oh, wow, Dragon's Den. I was pausing for a different reason, but Dragon's Den at Woodus.com is like one of the best Dragon Quest resources and fan sites out there. And you can see they're talking about Dragon Quest to the Stars at the time. What's interesting is if you see right over here, it says, what is Dragon Quest? Click here. There's a picture of Veronica from 11. And it was clearly like, okay, like people coming in who were just like, maybe they were interested in Dragon Quest 11, or maybe they had gotten the game and they wanted to know more about the series as a whole, or maybe even people coming in from Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. So there you have it. But what was I pausing for?
Before. Where do you start? What's the story like?
Yeah.
How does it all connect?
Where do you start? You start with 11. Just get the latest one. 11. It's available on almost every platform. You can get it on Steam, Xbox One, PS4, and Switch. So just get that one. How do they connect? Don't worry about it. What's the story? You just experience it. You could play them in any order.
I sat down and researched.
It's interesting for fans to come up with theories and timelines and everything, but it's not really important. It's sort of like Zelda, where they're nebulously was a timeline that was mostly a discussion between fans, and then they released Hyrule Historia, which showed the official timeline and kind of put that to rest in some ways, although some people were like, I don't agree with that, but generally speaking, it doesn't matter. Like, they're pretty self-contained games. It's not like there's some series where you're kind of expected to have played previous ones, but it's actually like in developers' best interest to make games as self-contained as they can be.
This confusing series for a few weeks, and it got even more confusing. Chronologically confusing, that is.
So yeah, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, but like I hadn't seen this video since February, and I actually forgot that it was one of his chronologically confusing videos.
So consider this video.
You can get it for Zelda and Kingdom Hearts and movies.
Timeline explanation. But first, a message from our sponsor, Square Enix.
Yeah, we're going to skip that. So a lot of people were kind of put off by this because he's doing what he says is his opinion and his reviews. He didn't really review anything in this from what I remember. And they were like, well, you how are we going to take you seriously when you're saying that you like these games or whatever, when your sponsor is Square Enix? But he's saying, oh, well, this part, everything after this is not part of sponsorship. It is my opinion. But, I don't know. James to me seems like the kind of guy that, like, if he didn't like the Dragon Quest series, if he thought they were, like completely whack, that he would not do a video on them at all, and he certainly is not hurting for sponsorship, so I don't think he would take one from Dragon Quest Tact if it was based on something that he just isn't interested in at all, And I don't know if he gets into it, but it seems to me that he got into it, Dragon Quest, in a way that a lot of people did, is through 11 being a very popular and new game, and just sort of like, oh, hey, this is cool. 11, so
it's not a part of the sponsored content. With that out of the way, let's start by taking a trip way back to the year 1986. At this point in the past, the NES was already out in North America and had taken the nation by storm. We got some good games that year, but overseas, the NES is...
He says we got some good games, and there's Karate Champ. Not a good game. Neither is Muscle.
Japanese counterpart, the Famicom, saw the release of classic titles that would change gaming forever. The Legend of Zelda, Castlevania, Metroid.
So at Zelda cover, I believe I think it's a re-release. I think it's a because it says 1 on it. So I think the original version was for the disk system, which you can see out of these three, the only one that's disk system is Metroid. Then they re-released it on console, and that's why it says 1. Also, interesting note is that there's a subtitle here. It says the Hyrule Fantasy. So it's like the, Zelda no Densetsu was what it says in Japanese, or the Legend of Zelda, Hyrule Fantasy. And it's always interesting how much English there is on Japanese box art. It's like, it's just interesting the way they do that.
And Dragon Quest.
Yes.
Dragon Quest is often credited as being the first Japanese role-playing game ever, predating even Final Fantasy.
Okay. I'm not gonna give him too much shit here because he didn't say that it was the first Japanese role-playing game. He said it's often credited as the first Japanese role-playing game. And okay, so I want to just say right off the bat that there is a difference between a Japanese role-playing game and a JRPG. Even though JRPG stands for Japanese role-playing game, that's literally what it stands for. If you say Japanese role-playing game, you could mean any game that's a role-playing game that was created or released in Japan. So you could use that to refer to Dark Souls. You could use that to refer to Elden Ring. You could use that to refer to a whole bunch of games that were created in Japan but are not really what are considered JRPGs. JRPG is like a specific style of game that very much owes itself to Dragon Quest. Was Dragon Quest the first JRPG? It's kind of interesting. Like Dragon Quest, when Yuji Horii and about 4 or 5 other guys, they were in a basement. They were working for a company called Chunsoft. They created Dragon Quest, and the concept behind it was, wow, these Ultima and Wizardry games are really cool. We love to play them on the computer. Could we distill something like that down to a form that could be played on the Famicom? Because Ultima, specifically Ultima, was a game that had to be played with not only with a keyboard, but used just about every button on it. Richard Gere, I thought he was very cute with every letter of the alphabet on the keyboard doing a different action in Ultima. So it's like, wow, all those different commands, all those different buttons. Could we make like a menu system and distill it down to something that could be played on a Famicom? And then almost all the JRPGs that came after that were like, wow, that Dragon Quest game was so popular and so successful. Let's do something like that. Is it the first JRPG? Well, it's sort of not really the first JRPG. The first JRPG, which is ironically created in Europe, was a game called The Black Onyx. It was created by European developers. It was a RPG made specifically to tailor to Japanese audiences. And that was sort of like the first game in that style, The Black Onyx. It's sort of a footnote in history now. It's sort of like a trivia question, the first JRPG being The Black Onyx. There were other ones that were Japanese RPGs that were getting close to that JRPG style, like, for example, Dragon Slayer, but weren't because they didn't have command-based combat or whatever. So what it comes down to it is that it could be a JRPG without being Japanese, and it could be a Japanese role-playing game without being a JRPG. It's not the very first one, but it is sort of the example that was followed by just about every developer, and it's where games like Final Fantasy or Phantasy Star kind of got their inspiration from. Even a game like Stargazer, which by the way not a very good game, but Stargazer was a PC RPG that predated Dragon Quest, and then they remade it for the Famicom, and they remade it to be more like Dragon Quest. So it was more like a Western RPG style on PC, and then they were like, let's remake it as a Dragon Quest clone. So that's where JRPGs kind of, it is the first like really super popular JRPG. Not the first, but like the most important and first popular one.
The game was published by the Enix Corporation in Japan, the company that would eventually merge with Squaresoft, forming Square Enix. The creators of the game, Yuji Horii and Koichi Nakamura, wanted to take the computer RPGs they saw in the...
No, I just mentioned that. And there's footage of Ultima. It's interesting that he mentions Enix as the publisher, but doesn't mention Chunsoft as the developer. Just goes into Horii and Nakamura specifically. But hey, whatever. You can't say everything. But that's Ultima 1 right there. The first Stage of Darkness.
Console players. And so Dragon Quest was born, and it's
love
now
that title
one
screen.
of the oldest and most beloved games in Japan, with 11 main entries and many different spin-offs. The games are all about action and...
So that's the first game. That's Dragon Quest 1. But that's actually, Dragon Warrior. That's the American version. I don't think he gets into this, but there were actually a lot of graphical differences between Dragon Quest on Famicom and Dragon Warrior on the SNES. So not only is the character's main sprite completely redrawn to be more detailed, but as you can see, he was walking down and then turned, and Aleph, or whatever you name him, is actually facing to the right, whereas in the original Famicom release, all character sprites were always facing one direction, which is sort of like what Ultima did. Also, this white outline around the coastlines, which makes them look better, was not in the Japanese release. And the Japanese release had passwords instead of battery save, which is really weird for an RPG.
Exploration, putting players in the shoes of a silent hero that they name themselves. In Dragon Quest, you typically solve problems in each...
Dragon Quest 8 on PS2, one of my favorites. I would say the Holy the holy trinity of Dragon Quest games is 5, 8, and 11. Also, oh God, I didn't know it at the time. I know it now, and you're seeing it now. But when I first played Dragon Quest 8, it was on PS2 on like this crappy CRT television that I had, and I didn't even know that it had like a widescreen mode until way later. And if I've been thinking about like maybe streaming Dragon Quest 8 at some point. And I've been like, well, do I do the 3DS version or do I do the PS2 version? And it's kind of an interesting thing. Like the 3DS version doesn't look as good. I can make it look a lot better by upscaling it, right? And it has a lot of quality of life improvements and a lot of extra content. The PS2 version I can also make look a lot better and runs in widescreen. So if there's any two Dragon Quest games that need re-releases badly, it's 8 and 9. 8 needs just like a modern console and PC re-release. Just take the PS2 version, give it to us in full widescreen in HD, modern HD, and give us some of the quality of life improvements from the 3DS version, and we'd be happy with that. You don't need to add a whole lot else, right? Just give us basically a mishmash of PlayStation 2 and 3DS content, and just release it in HD widescreen, and we'd be happy. The other one is 9 because it never came out on anything but the DS, and the online component is gone unless you go through private servers. It wasn't an MMO, but it was a single player game that you could play multiplayer if you wanted to.
By using clues
but look how good Dragon Quest 8 still looks. It's amazing. Here's 11
with fast turn-based combat. The games give a real sense of adventure. It's no wonder the series is considered a classic.
So that's actually believe it or not, that's kind of a remake. The original release of Dragon Quest 11, believe it or not, was on the 3DS. But they were making the 3DS version and the PlayStation 4 version simultaneously. They released the 3DS version first, and then the PlayStation 4 version, the 3DS version, never came out outside of Japan. But this is the re-release, which is Dragon Quest 11S. So Dragon Quest 11 PS4 version only had one port, which was to Steam. And then the S version was the Switch version, which had a whole lot of extra content. The graphics weren't really upgraded or downgraded. Some people say that they're a little downgraded, but they look pretty much the same. You have to really care to see a difference. But there's a lot of new content, and you could tell that it's S just by the fact that you see the other characters following him. So that was something that was added there.
But with so many different games...
Whoa. Can I go back with the brackets? Is it not working? I thought maybe it's these brackets? Oh, there it is. Okay. Oh, wow. All right. So, bunch of games here. So, why does James have 4 copies of Dragon Warrior? Wow. There's 4 copies of the same game. All right. So, he's got 1 there. There's 2 and 3 and 4. And that's the whole NES. These are all Super Famicom games. And wow, look at the condition of these. And some of these even look like they're sealed. Like this Dragon Warrior specifically looks like it's still in shrink wrap and some kind of plastic sleeve. So this is actually... So, well, here's 5 and 6 right here. This one's a spin-off. This is the Mystery Dungeon game, I believe. And these 2 are remakes. That's Dragon Quest 1 and 2, and that's Dragon Quest 3. And you can even see 4 here, and I believe it's Game Boy Advance, but it's or it could be PlayStation, but I think it's Game Boy Advance. I could tell it's a cardboard box. You can tell it's the Japanese version, though, right there. This is definitely Japanese. It looks like Game Boy Advance. I can't tell what it is. Based on the blue box, I want to think that it's one of the Monsters games, but it's really kind of out of focus. But why do you have so many copies of the first one? Wow.
Spin-off.
Now, that's a hell of a spin-off. You don't see this one too often. This was Dragon Quest... I think it's called Battle Victory Road or something like this. It wasn't for a console. It was a plug and play. You can even see the colored AV cables here. It was what's called a plug and play console or a TV game, which is basically where you get a controller and you plug the controller directly into your television, and the console part of it and the game part of it are housed in the controller. So it's like if I took this Xbox controller, which is actually broken, but if I took this Xbox controller, and I'm retiring this once the new one comes tomorrow, and plugs into a television, and then there was a game that could be played without a console, because all the console and the game was in the controller itself. They're called plug and play consoles. And in this case, the controller was a sword. It was a motion control thing. And this was before the Wii, and you would wave the sword around and fight monsters that were coming at you. I believe there was an arcade sort of version of this. This is the home version. And then they made sort of a sequel called Dragon Quest Swords, which actually was for the Wii. So yeah, it's interesting. You never see this game in a box like that. That's so cool that he has that. Also, you could see this is that looks like a guide for Dragon Warrior 1. And what is that? Why, it's hard to see. I don't know if that's just the side of the box, I think. Huh. No, it's not this. It's something else. It's some other kind of box or something.
Animated series.
So that's the Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior anime from the 90s, which I never got to see back in the day because it was on at like 6 a.m. and I wasn't about to be getting up that early. It was loosely based on the third game.
And more, it makes you wonder if they're all connected in any way. So far,
Loves to show footage of them running through Dungersville.
There's never been an official Dragon Quest timeline.
Only ones that fans come up with.
The game's creator has also never mentioned a timeline, and he often avoids the question, apparently.
He doesn't want people to get hung up on it.
However, dedicated fans...
So I've actually seen this on Twitter. It's a really good timeline.
Which I'll get into soon.
It's not definitive. None of them are, but it's a good one.
Japan got Dragon Quest in '86, and it was so successful that Nintendo of America decided to bring it over in '89. Only it didn't come out.
It was
as
published by
Dragon Quest.
Nintendo, the first
It
one.
came over as Dragon Warrior. Yeah, that's right. You see, there was already a Dragon Quest game over here, a pen and paper role-playing game called Dragon Quest.
This fucking warrior with his bulge.
One word. They already had the trademark,
What?
and that didn't even expire until 2003.
And when did Dragon Quest 8 come out? And if you look at Dragon Quest 8 on the Dragon Quest logo, you can see a little trademark. The trademark lapsed, and then Square Enix snatched it up.
So, unlike Final Fantasy, which only changed up the number order, Dragon Quest got its name changed, and it stayed that way for an entire decade.
I wonder if James knows how many Final Fantasy games were released in the West that weren't actually Final Fantasy games. Like, it would be interesting to tell him, like, hey, by the way, did you know that there aren't any Final Fantasy games on Game Boy? That that these are games that the names were changed to Final Fantasy to make them successful. I wonder if he knows about that.
Plus, Dragon Quest sounds like an RPG, whereas Dragon Warrior sounds like a fighting game, like
or any kind of action game. It's Double Dragon.
Double Dragon. So I can see why kids in the 90s, like myself, got confused by this whole thing or were turned off from the series. And it doesn't help that the box art was even changed over here.
It's like I know a bunch of people that played the first game, Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior, back in the day, and they weren't into it, and they're now into the series. Like my friend Jesse, Armageddon Time, he likes RPGs now, but back when he played it, he said, oh man, I was like 7 years old and I played this game, and it was like, what? Reading? This game is for adults or something. Give me Mario, and my friend Loxless also had a similar story that he just told me recently, where he mentioned that he played just a few minutes of Dragon Quest a long time ago when it was called Dragon Warrior, didn't get very far, wasn't really all that interested in it, just because, like all this reading RPG stuff. Now, it's all he plays is RPGs. Sometimes, I think that part of the reason that Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest did not catch on in the West like it did, because people thought of video games as just a thing for kids, and it was a game that maybe more adults would enjoy. Kids enjoy it too, but there were a lot of kids that were just like, I don't want to deal with all this. I don't want stats and reading and all that. And that's perfectly fine if they just want to play action games. Some people just want to play action games. Some adults just want to play action games. But I think that it was a game that was more geared towards older audiences, and there weren't really that many older audiences. In the 80s, it was almost like shameful for an adult to be playing video games, whereas today it's not.
The Japanese version has this colorful, expressive, cartoony cover art for Dragon Quest, while the West got this much more serious...
So it's interesting how he talks about the art style, but he never mentions Akira Toriyama, who is one of the creators of Dragon Quest. He does all the visual design. He designs all the characters. He designs all the monsters. He also created Dragon Ball and, Chrono Trigger. He did that. So it's a very distinct style, and anybody could see Toriyama art and immediately know it as Toriyama art. So it's kind of interesting that James didn't mention that.
But generic fantasy art.
All right, it might be generic, but it's still kind of cool, though, right?
These two boxes have a totally different tone. The Dragon Warrior art looks like it would be painted on the side of some badass van.
Oh my god, look at that. I love that it's obviously Photoshop. Like, not only do you have the text here, The text is there, but like you could see that there's like horses, like this was once like some kind of like cowboy or western scene. And my guess is that James probably went on a Google image search for airbrush van and picked one that kind of matched the colors of Dragon Warrior's box art. And I wonder if I go to Google image search and type that in. Let's try it. Let's do airbrush van, and let's see if that image comes up at all. Like, he might have just, like, done this and then scrolled down and found one that was, like, kind of a similar color and was a good angle, but... unfortunately, I'm not seeing it, but... Oh, there it is. That's it, right? That could be it. I don't think that's it, actually. It's similar to that. Maybe that is it. All right, well, let's get back to the video.
The Dragon Quest box has a nice, unique look, but I guess someone thought the anime look wouldn't sell here, which is probably right, but I think it turned off more people by being so generic.
I don't know that if it would have sold better or not with that kind of art style. I do know that, like, in the 80s, nobody really knew what anime was. There were, like, a few, like, hardcore nerds that were into it. It wasn't even called anime. Everybody called it Japanimation. You know, Japan animation, Japanimation, and then the term kind of fell out of favor when the term anime came out. I don't know why they went with anime over Japanimation, because to me, Japanimation is easier to... You don't have to explain it. You kind of figure, oh, Japanese animation. But maybe it's because not all Japanese animation is anime? Maybe? I don't know.
Back on track. Quest 2 came out in 87, Warrior 2 in 90, Quest 3 in 88, Warrior 3 in 92. I should mention, these games all use Roman numerals, like Final Fantasy and Rocky, well, until they stopped numbering Rocky. Anyway...
They always stop numbering something. Eventually, things just stop getting numbered. Dragon Quest is one of the longest series, and they're still using Roman numerals. I mean, Final Fantasy has more entries. We're going on Final Fantasy 16, but just going by sheer length, you know.
Quest 4 was in 90, and Warrior 4 was in 92, the same year as Warrior 3. Damn it. After the release of Warrior 4,
part of the reason it
Remakes
didn't sell so well.
Corporation closed down, so we wouldn't even see Dragon Quest 5 or 6 in the West.
All right, let me clear up the confusion here. So it's not like immediately after Dragon Warrior 4 that Enix America closed down. As a matter of fact, there were many Enix games that were released on Super Nintendo, such as ActRaiser, ActRaiser 2, Soul Blazer, The Illusion of Gaia, RoboTrek, and Brainlord. And there's probably some more that I'm not even thinking. Oh, EVO Search for Eden. But towards the end of the Super Nintendo's life cycle is when Enix did indeed shut down their American publishing branch, which is why we didn't get games like Terranigma and Dragon Quest VI. Now, why didn't we get Dragon Quest V? It was released much earlier in the Super Famicom's life cycle. It's probably just due to the fact that, and I alluded to this earlier, that Dragon Warrior 4 in the West did not sell all that well. It sold actually very badly, partly due to diminishing returns off of people who were playing it, you know, from the beginning, and maybe people just lose interest. A lot of people who bought Dragon Warrior 1 only got it because they wanted a subscription to Nintendo Power. Doesn't necessarily mean they were into the game. The Super Nintendo was out, and American gamers are very quick to abandon a console compared to Japanese gamers. And it came out very shortly after Dragon Quest 3 or Dragon Warrior 3 with really no fanfare at all. So, you know, 4 just sold badly, and that's the real reason we didn't get 5. Dragon Quest 6 kind of had a troubled production. It was the first game in the series not developed by Chunsoft. All the key players, Nakamura and Yuji Horii, I combined his two names, and Sugiyama and Akira Toriyama, they all worked on it, but the core development team, everybody else around them, was no longer Chunsoft. Chunsoft did a few more Dragon Quest games after 5, like they did a remake of 1 and 2, and they did some of the spin-offs, but it was handed over to a company called Heartbeat. They made Dragon Quest 6 and 7, and they made a remake of 4 on PlayStation, and then, you know, nothing else after that. They kind of don't exist anymore. They've only made those games. and then from there on, it was like, okay, like level 5 to Dragon Quest 8 and 9, and then 11 is done by Square Enix themselves. So what's interesting is Dragon Quest 6 was a little troubled is that they were being handed off to a developer that had never made a game before, and so many of the key players at, Chunsoft, who were working on Dragon Quest traditionally, were really splitting their time between working on Dragon Quest and working on Dragon Quest 6 and working on Chrono Trigger. And Chrono Trigger definitely got the bulk of the popularity there. The kind of a saying is that that Dragon Quest 6 was sort of like sacrificed to make Chrono Trigger. It's still a really good game. You know what I mean? It's still a really good game. There's nothing wrong with Dragon Quest 6. It's that a lot of people who've played it, myself included, feel that while it's very good, it could have been better. So the reason that we probably didn't get it was probably that a lot of that I just mentioned. And at that point, there was no Enix in America. But 5, there was Enix in America at the time that 5 would have come out here. It's just that clearly I don't think that they thought that there was going to be any interest or any like sales figures there.
Till the remakes on the Nintendo DS 17 years later.
Fantastic remix, by the way.
Almost every game in this.
It's interesting. I never really thought about this, that 5 is rated E10 plus and 6 is rated T. And like really just like through my experience of playing them, I would think that it would be the opposite. That 6 would be rated E10 plus and 5 would be rated T. Like 5 is a pretty dark game. A lot of bad stuff happens to the main character. I mean, it's like a trauma Congo line from his birth to the very end of the game. So
series has been
never noticed that before.
Way, but we'll get into that soon. So Western fans of Dragon Warrior, who just finished 4, had to wait 8 years to play another localized game in the series, with Dragon Warrior 7 in 2001.
And that was very late in the PlayStation's life cycle, and it's kind of a miracle that we got it. The company that actually translated it took a long time because there was a hell of a lot of text. It's an obscenely long game, and even though Dragon Quest VII was released fairly early in the PlayStation's life cycle in Japan, it took a long time to come out here, and the graphics looked very dated for its time. It looked like an early PlayStation game, not a late PlayStation game. So this is another one that was really slept on until the 3DS remake came out. And the company that brought it over went out of business. The company that translated it and I believe also published it, they were going, and if you have this, and I have this Dragon Warrior 7, if you look at the back of the insert, there's an ad for Dragon Warrior 4 remake, which Dragon Quest 4 and some screenshots, and they went out of business. They went bankrupt and could never bring it over. So that's kind of crappy.
Point, people were thinking,
this is already a half hour.
What happened to Dragon Warrior 5 and 6? Good question. To add to the confusion, Dragon Quest VIII came to the West in 2005 for the PlayStation 2, this time with its correct Japanese title, Dragon Quest. They finally dropped Warrior.
You can see the trademark.
The paper game finally lost its
right
trademark to the name Dragon Quest. So then, people who were waiting for Dragon Warrior 8 were now getting
I wonder if James made that logo or not.
What a mess. After 8, we got 9 in 2010 for the Nintendo DS, and then we got 11 in 2018. Wait, hold on a second. Dragon Quest 11?
9 doesn't come after 11, does it?
Doesn't come after 9.
11 does.
What happened to
Wow,
Dragon
I screwed
Quest
that up.
10? So
MMO.
Dragon Quest 10 was never released outside of Japan. They skipped it in the West and went straight to 11. 10 came out in 2012 as an MMORPG for the Wii, and since had multiple expansions and moved on to the PS4, Nintendo Switch, and PC. It's currently the only mainline Dragon Quest game that was never released in the West.
They're working on
sucks.
They're working on an offline version of it, which I believe might actually come out in the West. And the reason that I think Dragon Quest X offline might come out is at the presentation, which was, it was all done in Japanese, but it was aimed towards American viewers, and they showed off 6 games, many of which were spin-offs, but like the ones that were main series games were Dragon Quest XII, Dragon Quest III HD 2D Remake, and Dragon Quest X Offline. They also showed off Dragon Quest X Revision 6, which was like the next expansion coming out for it. And they said there are currently it was like right on the screen, there are currently no plans to bring it to the West. It's the only one that they said that about. Right? So make me think that they have plans to bring all those other games out to the West.
Looks all right.
I mean, one of them is like a
Dragon Quest
mobile
11
game, so
is
whatever.
the most recent game in the series, but we still haven't accounted for the fact that there's over a dozen spin-offs and
Whoa. We got to look at what we have there. So, okay, so some Game Boy and Game Boy Color games here. There's 1 and 2. There's 3. Dragon Quest Monsters, and there's Monsters 2, which was released as 2 different games. Sort of like Pokemon Red version, Blue version. They did that with Dragon Quest Monsters. Here's a bunch of Game Boy Advance games that are all Japanese, and they're all upside down, which is crazy. Well, these are Game Boy Color, because that's 1 and 2, and that's 3. What does that say? That's Monsters. That's the first Monsters. This is the 2 versions of Monsters 2. And this, is this Game Boy or Game Boy Color? What does that say? It says Dragon Quest Monsters. Oh, it's the same thing as that one. It's the exact same thing. He just has 2 of them, and they look slightly, like this one looks a little more gray than this one just because the lighting's different. What are you jumping at me for? Oh, yeah, these are Game Boy Advance games. That is hard to see. Wow, there's a bunch of them. I believe that this one right here, this white one, is Dragon Quest Monsters Caravan Heart. This one, God, I wish I could blow that up and really look at it. I don't know what that is. It could be, I don't know what that could be. I think it's the slime game. And this, I think, is one of the Fortune Street games. And this is a re-release of Dragon Quest Monsters. And then you could see he has Dragon Quest 7 here on the PlayStation, and you know it's Japanese because this is Dragon Quest 7 and not Dragon Warrior 7. So there you go. It's kind of interesting.
An anime series
That's Dragon Quest: The Adventures of Dai, which is the new anime.
With an original story, several side novels.
Oh, the novels. The one on the left is based on Dragon Quest 4. You can see the Dragon Quest 4 logo there and the characters, Solo and Sophia. It's interesting that they're both on the cover because it's usually you're playing as one or the other. The game asks you if you want to play as a male character or a female character. There's a few that do that. You could do that in 3, 4, 9, and I got to assume 10. The one on the right doesn't even look like a Dragon Quest game. It looks like some cheesecake manga shit. And the only thing that you could tell that it's Dragon Quest is it says Dragon Quest here, but it doesn't. It's not in like the familiar logo. Oh, it's so weird. I wish I could read Japanese to tell you what this says. I mean, you see the Enix logo there, but who knows what that even is? It could be based on 3, based on the orbs floating around, but I don't know who that girl is or what's going on at all, what that sword is. There's nothing about that makes sense to me. Let me see if I can maybe find out what that is. I'm kind of really curious about that. I'm just going to search for Dragon Quest light novel. So let's see. Legend of Rubus, could that be it? Is that Rubus? I mean, that's not the same exact cover. It's similar with a redheaded girl, but it could be connected to Legend of Rubus. I am not seeing that exact one. Wow, that's interesting. I mean, I see the Adventures of Dai manga, and maybe it's not a light novel. Maybe it's like a novel. There's another one with a redheaded girl on it, but I think that's Elena. That's Princess Elena, I think. Let me just take out the word light here. Dragon Quest novel. All right, well, not all this is related to the video game series, but I mean, complete set 1 and 2? I wonder. I mean, it could be a take on Princess Gwaelin, but oh, here it is. I found it. And it says specifically that that's Rubus. This is Dragon Quest Story, Legend of Rubus. That's Elena. Yeah, that's Elena. Here it is. So this is Rubus, who is a character, an unseen character in Dragon Quest 2, also 6, mentioned in a few other games. I didn't know that, she's sort of like a ghost that is like a minor goddess that plays a big part in some of these games.
And almost every game in this series has been remade with new story elements that link the games together even more. That's a lot to take in. So where do we start? Well, there's no better place to start than the beginning. In Dragon Quest I, you play as the Scion of Erdrick.
Bro, you said Scion. This is what I was talking about. That's not even a made up. It's Scion. Scion means descendant, right? It Scion? Really? James, what are you doing?
The story is simple. You're the descendant of a hero known as Erdrick, who lived long ago and defeated the evil Dragon Lord, saving the...
No. Erdrick did not defeat the Dragon Lord. Erdrick defeated a much more powerful being called Zoma. The Dragon Lord came into power many, many years after Erdrick was gone. So, no.
Land of Alfgard. Well,
all of that, Matt.
Years later, the Dragon Lord is back and ready for
He's
revenge.
not back. He was appearing.
And...
I mean, technically speaking, the Dragon Lord is kind of... Because the backstory of Erdrick is told in Dragon Quest III. Technically speaking, you can make an argument that the Dragon Lord's in it. But he wasn't born yet. He was an egg. Well, not hatched yet. So, yeah.
Steals the Ball of Light, bringing darkness and despair to the land. It's up to the Erdrick's descendant to follow his ancestors' footsteps and reclaim the Ball of Light. The game sees players travel an open...
If you're going to walk in a circle and grind, you want to do it like in the forest or the hills, and it happens quicker.
Going between
higher encounter rate.
Solving problems for the townspeople. They work their way through the game, leveling up by fighting monsters until they reach the Dragon Lord and eventually defeat
spoilers.
him, saving the land.
I'm joking.
What's even more interesting is how much of the game you can skip over in one sitting. Get a load of this. The princess is hidden in a cave to the east.
I love how obvious it is that the princess is a background tile and not a sprite.
Guarded by a green dragon. And it turns out you don't even have to save her. You can just...
Well, it could be a sprite, but it's like unedited from the original Dragon Quest.
Just defeat the Dragon Lord and that's it. What an asshole. If you do this, she doesn't even appear in the final scene where the king and townspeople congratulate you. Talk about a dick move. However, it's safe to say that saving the princess is what you should do, as Dragon Quest II is a direct sequel to Dragon Quest I, and the princess is important.
That's the Game Boy version of 2. Well, Game Boy Color version, but can be played on Game Boy. Yeah, it's interesting though. But if the only way that you would ever like beat the game without rescuing the princess is if you're replaying it. Maybe you're trying to speedrun. Maybe you ain't gonna bother with her, right? But the main idea of rescuing the princess is that she gives you an item called Gwaylen's Love where you could use to locate Erdrick's token, which you do need to beat the game. If you played the game before, you just know where the token is, though.
Plot-wise, at the end of Dragon Quest I, the hero and the princess set off to establish kingdoms throughout the world outside of Alfgard, and then in Dragon Quest II, you play as one of their descendants,
Alan,
the Prince of Midenhall, who grew up as royalty in this world 100 years later. Oh, and in Dragon Quest II,
I love how excited James sounds.
One descendant of Erdrick. No, you play as 3. The Prince of Midenhall teams up with his cousins from neighboring kingdoms, so with the Princess of Moonbrook and the Prince of Connacht, you're an unstoppable force against the monsters that roam the land.
Yeah, but the Prince of Connacht low-key sucks.
Well, aside from the Prince of Connacht dying after every single battle.
Okay, that's funny, although to be fair, he had 4 hit points there, so what did you expect to happen?
I'm serious, this guy dies so easily. For half the game, it'll just be you and the princess dragging around his coffin. Anyway,
it's interesting when you think about it that why would you be dragging him around in a coffin? Could you make a stretcher or something? I love the idea. Oh well, he's dead. Let's put him in a coffin and drag him to the church. Doesn't that make it a lot heavier? Are they just lugging around coffins in case any of them die?
In this game, your nemesis is Lord Hargan.
Is it Hargan? I didn't see now. It could be Hargan. I've always called him Hargon. And most people, I think, say Hargon. It could be Hargon. I don't know. It's a made-up fantasy name. But considering the fact that James can't say Scion, I'm a little dubious.
You find him, kill him, and bring peace to the land. So far, it's very straight.
No mention of Malroth. Malroth was the actual last boss of Dragon Quest II. It was the dark god that Hargon was trying to revive, and he did manage to revive Malroth right as you kill him, so that what happens is you beat Hargon and you think the game's over and you start walking out and suddenly you're attacked by the true final boss, Malroth, who probably kicks your butt because you probably thought the game was over and you didn't stop and heal yourself, right? After that grueling battle with Hargon. So it's actually really historically important because some of these things seem like cliches, but they were invented by Dragon Quest. In Dragon Quest 1, the final boss had 2 forms. That's not something that, was commonly done. Now it's very common. In Dragon Quest 2, the guy you thought was the final boss was not the final boss. There was one extra fight, which is very common now, but wasn't then. And by the way, before anybody mentions it in the comments, the dragon that you fight at the end of Dragon Quest is the Dragon Lord. As a lot of people say, oh, in the original Japanese, he was his pet dragon that attacks you. No, that's a mistranslation. If you read the original Japanese, it does say the Dragon Lord reveals his true form.
Forward. Dragon Quest 1 is first, and then Dragon Quest 2 is the direct sequel. The timeline, however, gets a little tricky when we start Dragon Quest 3. 1 and 2 took place in this...
I mean, let me go back there. Like, Malroth's even on the cover there. Like, I mean, you might think, oh, that's just some giant monster, but that's actually Malroth there.
However, gets a little tricky when we start Dragon Quest 3. 1 and 2 took
Not that
place
tricky,
in the
it's a
same
prequel.
world, but as far as I can see, the world of Dragon Quest 3 is totally different. As a matter of fact, it looks exactly like our real world. I mean, look at this. There's North America, South America, Australia, Africa. You could probably find your own house in this game.
And what's interesting is that if you rotate it 90 degrees, it's extremely similar to the map of Dragon Quest XI.
South America, Australia, Africa. You could probably find your own house in this game. Well, as it turns out, Dragon Quest III is not a sequel to Dragon Quest II at all. No, it's actually a prequel to Dragon Quest I, Castlevania style. In Dragon Quest III, you play as an ordinary hero sent off.
3 was a prequel in Castlevania, so
fiend Baramus, with companions.
Baramus. I'll accept it. I thought he has Brindar, Elucidus, Satras, and then Fredfuck and Shitpick. I assume those Fredfucks and Shitpickle. And for the record, Fred Fox is a fighter, and Shitpickle's a pilgrim, which would now be known as monk and cleric.
Customize yourself. After defeating the Archfiend, the hero falls to the Dark World.
Imagine being healed by Shitpickle, and he heals you.
Well, it turns out he fell to an ancient version of Alfgard, and after defeating the true final boss there, the hero is deemed worthy of the title of Erdrick. So, in Dragon Quest III, you play as the legendary hero who is mentioned countless times in the first 2 games, and you see for yourself how the legend began.
And by the way, these games all had subtitles in Japan. Now we know Dragon Quest III is the Seeds of Salvation, but back then it was an Into the Legend, so it is like how the legend began.
I have to admit, that's pretty badass and well thought out for the time. And so the first 3 games are very clearly connected and often dubbed the Erdrick trilogy by fans.
That's true.
Now is where things really take a turn. Dragon Quest IV has practically no...
So it's interesting how he shows the Famicom box and then immediately goes into footage from the DS version, but I digress.
Nothing to do with the first 3 games. It takes place in a brand new world with a brand new cast of characters. Well, it turns out Dragon Quest IV marked the beginning of a new era for Dragon Quest.
The Zenithian trilogy,
right? The Zenithian trilogy.
I just said that. Come on, keep up.
These games consist of Dragon Quest IV, V, and VI. They have a lot of elements linking them together, particularly Zenithia Castle, which is a flying castle in the sky, and it appears in all 3 games. Dragon Quest V slowly reveals itself as a direct sequel to Dragon Quest IV, set in the far-off future as the hero of this game is on the search for the descendant of the Dragon Quest IV protagonist.
Not so much descendant, he's looking for the legendary hero or the luminary. It's not necessarily a bloodline thing, it could be a reincarnation thing as well.
The Zenithian equipment from Dragon Quest IV appeared...
Because the whole thing... Alright, so spoilers for Dragon Quest V. The whole thing is that your father, Pankraz, is... you're playing as the main character, Madison. Your father, Pankraz, has been searching for the legendary hero. He has the Zenithian sword, but he cannot wield it in battle. When he holds it, he finds himself sapped of strength. He cannot use it as a weapon. So he realizes early on, Pankraz realizes early on, rather, that he's not the legendary hero. He's not the Luminary, and he needs to find the Luminary, the person to wield the Zenithian equipment. You, after your father passes away, you take on that same quest to find the hero. You find that you are not the hero. The main character cannot equip the Zenithian sword. So, towards the latter part of the game, you have a son. You have a son and a daughter, but your son, Parry, is the Luminary. He is able to use the sword. So he's the hero. So you're not necessarily looking for the descendant of the hero from 4, because if you think about it, he's your son. So that makes you and your father both descendants. So why didn't the sword work for you? So it's not so much about being in that bloodline of the Luminary, but being chosen. And the whole thing was that the hero was not in the world. Pankraz and Madison were unable to find the hero because he wasn't born yet. But they played a very important role because obviously, the hero is Pankraz's grandson. So, like I said, it's not really a bloodline thing where you're looking for a descendant, because it's your descendant as well. It's your son. So, and it's also brought up that you also have a daughter, and she's not the Luminary. So it's like, and they're twins, right? So why is it him and not both of them? It's because he's chosen. That's why.
And 5. These are the legendary items the hero has to collect: the Zenithian sword, shield, armor, and helm. Also, the Zenith Dragon, the protector of the world, appears in both games as well.
Dragon
so
God
it's
diddly
pretty
doodly.
obvious that Dragon Quest V takes place after Dragon Quest IV. What's a little more tricky is Dragon Quest VI. The fans
It's another
seem to
prequel.
agree that 6 is a prequel to 4, the same way 3 is a prequel to 1.
Very much so.
Some evidence includes Cloud's Gate Citadel, which is clearly supposed to be an early Zenithia castle. There's even a King Zenith who rules over it. So great. Now we have 2 completely unrelated trilogies, and they aren't even in chronological order. The timeline goes forward, then backwards, and it does this twice for 2 different continuities.
So James is doing something that I myself have done in the past, where I did a series called Clearing Confusion, and a lot of people said wow, I wasn't confused about this before, but now that you bring it up, it is quite confusing. When you say it that way, it sounds a lot more confusing than it is. There's a way of saying things to make it sound like, oh my God, that's so complicated, and it really isn't.
And it gets even more weird. After Dragon Quest VI, we've got Dragon Quest VII, and at first it seems like there's no connection at all to previous entries.
It's in the Erdrick timeline.
The game is about a trio of kids.
It's all
piecing
PlayStation
together
footage.
Fragments of the past, one by one, and it takes place in a world.
The 3DS game was out
we
at this
don't think
time.
we've
So.
seen before. But once again, the fans of Dragon
You love the way that Oster looks like we got Link at home.
Quest really dug deep and discovered a connection. It turns out there's a spin-off title that was released later that ties
On the
Dragon
Game Boy
Quest
Advance.
VII with the Erdrick trilogy.
Only in Japan.
Dragon Quest Monsters Caravan Heart for the Game Boy Advance. It sees Prince Kiefer.
Prince Kiefer. James, you're probably not watching this, right? But have you ever heard of that famous actor that was in 24, Kiefer Sutherland? Really? It's Kiefer, man. It's Kiefer. Prince Kiefer. It's not even a fake name. I mean, Oster is sort of a weird name, right? But then you Kiefer, Maribel, Mervyn. Aisha, that one's a little weird, but she's supposed to be kind of exotic. And, the names are pretty straightforward. Kiefer, really?
One of the main characters from
It's a fan translation, by the way.
going on an adventure in
Surprised
the
he didn't
world of
mention
Dragon
that.
Quest 2, implying that Dragon Quest 7 takes place hundreds of years in the future after the Erdrick trilogy. If it wasn't enough, an official manga for Dragon Quest 7 even confirms the relation, showing that Kiefer is directly descended from the Prince of Middenhall in Dragon Quest 2.
It actually makes perfect sense that Kiefer, he keeps saying Kiefer, but it's Kiefer, is royalty because he's a descendant of Alan. Alan was the Prince of Middenhall. Kiefer is actually a prince. He's the Prince of Estark. He does give up his royal title at some point in Dragon Quest VII because it involves time travel. He winds up going back many hundreds of years in the past with the rest of the party, and then he likes to stay there because he's fallen in love with a girl. So, but it makes sense that, if you go from Dragon Quest II all the way through to 7 and the many hundreds of years that pass between, that that there's still the royal bloodline there.
So these little details link a game that seems completely standalone to a previous game in the series. Dragon Quest VIII is a similar situation. At first, it seems like it has nothing to do with previous games.
So I see 8 as being an alternate take on the Erdrick trilogy because of Imperia being there, and Imperia mentions that, many years ago in a different realm, they refer to her as Ramia, which is the bird from Dragon Quest III. So it's somewhere in the Erdrick timeline, or at least an offshoot of the Erdrick timeline, but we don't really know exactly where.
The game takes place in a brand new world. It stars a hero and his band traveling across the land searching for an evil jester. You would think that this is a brand new start for the series, but no. If you look into the game a little more,
there's Imperia.
It seems to be linked to the Erdrick trilogy yet again. In Dragon Quest VIII, you eventually meet a giant bird goddess who flies around named Imperia.
He says Imperia instead of Imperia. I mean, it is like a made-up fantasy name, so I can understand how you'd say it wrong, but like, come on, there's voice acting. She clearly says Imperia.
The party know that hundreds of years ago, she was named Ramia, which is the name of the giant bird that you fly in Dragon Quest III.
A Super Famicom version.
8 takes place in the future of 3. So
I just played that recently.
Like a lot of these games are connected to 3. Now is where we get...
3 was a really big selling game. It sold better than most of them did. So that's kind of why like they keep coming back to that.
To 9. Is that part of the Erdrick trilogy? Is it part of the Zenithian trilogy? No, 9 has practically nothing to do with the previous games, and 10 doesn't either. They take place in different worlds with different mythologies.
So if you, not really different mythology, but a different take on the same mythology. If you think about Dragon Quest XI as being a split point with the timeline that that is the first 2 acts of the game, right? And then the hero vanishes because he goes back in time and creates a new timeline, right? That original timeline becomes the Zenithian timeline that leads to Dragon Quest VI, right? And then the timeline that you go to, where you go back in time and sort of do everything right, and you kill Kalasmos, and then Mordegon never rises to power. Kalasmos does. You destroy him. You prevent the world tree from falling. It's just a way better timeline. That's the Erdrick timeline. But then at the very, very end of the game, after you beat it, it shows a Luminary of the past, Serenica, using the Supreme Sword of Light to go back in time to be reunited with the original Luminary, the Luminary of Light himself, Erdwin. And that creates a third timeline. And since the split point is much, much further up, much, much earlier in the timeline, that's why the mythology is so different. So, and that's the timeline that is usually attributed to being Dragon Quest 9 and 10.
They feature a new version of the World Tree and a different goddess than in previous games, though they seem to be connected.
It's still the Yig Dragon, but they always just refer to her as the goddess.
To each other by a shared mythology, leading some fans to believe...
Okay, I know that was footage from Dragon Quest X, but would you see Santa Claus yelling at Stella? Stella appearing in 10 is sort of like the main thing that shows that it's connected to 9.
They seem to be connected...
But is that like a buff Santa Claus? Does Dragon Quest X go all Secret of Mana at one point and bring Santa Claus? And why is he... He's like... Does anybody speak Japanese and knows what the hell Santa Claus is saying to Stella? Like, I recognize Stella because she's from Dragon Quest IX. I don't know why Santa Claus is in this game.
Mythology,
I never played 10.
Some fans to believe that 9 and 10 might be a duology of their own.
The Serenica timeline.
11, which is the most recent entry in the
series,
series,
is the split point,
the
original.
Does a really good job of solving some timeline inconsistencies. Throughout the game, players are misled into thinking...
I don't think there's timeline inconsistencies. I just think that people have different interpretations of what the timeline is because there's no official word of God about it from Yuji Horii or anyone affiliated with Square Enix.
Thinking that this is yet another sequel to 3, just like we've seen a million times now. The main character of this game is known as the Luminary, and he goes on a journey following in his own ancestors' footsteps.
Once again, Erdwin was not necessarily an ancestor. As a matter of fact, Erdwin died, and it's, Erdwin's true love was Serenica, who, after Erdwin died, locked herself in the Tower of Time and stayed there for centuries. So it doesn't seem they really had children, right? It's more of a reincarnation thing. You are the reincarnation of the original Luminary of Light, Erdwin. You are not his descendant by blood.
Much like in the first Dragon Quest. However, it pulls the rug out from underneath you, and at the end reveals that Dragon Quest XI is actually a prequel to 3, and chronologically, the very first game.
So just start with this one. Also, I never felt like Dragon Quest XI was pushing itself as a sequel to 3. I mean, maybe James got that sort of vibe from it. Maybe he was thinking, oh, Erdwin's kind of like Erdrick. Maybe this is, they got the name wrong or something. But yeah.
Oh boy. The Luminary earns the title of Erdrick himself at the end, being the first person to obtain this status. The final scene even shows the hero of Dragon Quest I setting off on his own adventure many years later.
First of all, what an amazing scene. But it's, I mean, this is where I'm going to get really nerdy and nitpicky about it. It's not the beginning of his journey, and I can tell because even though he's standing on this cliff and you can see, like, across the bay, you could see Charlotte Castle, and that's sort of like the first thing, like, you step out of the castle, and then you can see the last dungeon across the bay. There's Charlotte, and the whole game is figuring out how to get there. But as you can see, he is wielding the Sword of Kings, or also known as Erdrick's Sword. The official title of it is the Sword of Kings. But it became known just as Erdrick's Sword because it is the sword that Erdrick wielded all those years ago. So this is what happened. So Aleph here has already been to Charlotte Castle because that's actually where the Sword of Kings is. You have to go to the final dungeon to get it. So he did what everybody else does. Like, he did what everybody does when they play Dragon Quest 1. They go into the castle, they get the sword, and then they get the hell out of there. And they go back to the beginning. So he probably got the sword, cast Evac to get the hell out of Charlotte, cast Zoom to go back to the first place, which is Tadjil, and then was, rested up, healed himself, right? Maybe bought some items or something, and was like, all right, now I got the thing. I'm coming for you, Dragon Lord.
That's pretty conclusive evidence to me.
Well, you don't even have a sword at the beginning. You actually have no weapon at the beginning of Dragon Quest 1. It's kind of crazy. You have to go and buy a weapon.
But here's where an already confusing timeline gets even more confusing. So now, the Erdrick trilogy is actually the Erdrick quadrilogy. Well, that's like a trilogy, but with 4 entries.
Well, quintilogy if we're including 7.
Now, one thing that really annoys
and
me
a
is when a nonlinear
sexology if we're
branches
continuing,
off.
if we're having
A
8 there.
somewhat popular theory is that the events of Dragon Quest XI led to the timeline splitting in multiple directions, leading to the Zenithian trilogy and the Erdrick trilogy as different timeline branches, just like Ocarina of Time did with the Zelda timeline. I mean, that would at least explain all the differences between the two trilogies and put a ton of questions to rest. At the end of Dragon Quest XI's second act, you have the choice of
I do love that he
traveling
says
back in
second
time
act.
to undo the damage that the main villain caused and stop him much earlier in the story before it's too late. The theory goes that when the Luminary goes back in time, he leaves behind a ruined world with no more descendants of Erdrick and a shattered legendary sword. You see, there's
Which
three
became the
main
Zenithian
swords
sword.
in the series. The Sword of Light, or Erdrick's sword from
That's
that
the Sword of
trilogy,
Kings, not the Sword of
Supreme
Light.
Sword of Light from 11,
That's the Sword of
and
Light.
the Zenithian sword from the Zenithian trilogy. According to this fan theory, the Luminary's Supreme Sword of Light was broken due to...
So the sword that you shatter at the end of Act 2 is not the Supreme Sword. There's 3 Swords of Light in Dragon Quest XI. This can get a little confusing. There's the original Sword of Light, which you never got to use. It was shown there at the Yggdrasil. And right before you're going to grab it is when you get attacked by, what's his name? Not Hendrik, the other guy. Jasper. Jasper attacks you. He incapacitates you, beats the crap out of you and your party. And then his boss, Mordegon, shows up, takes the Sword of Light and corrupts it into the Sword of Shadows. So that's, Act 1, right? Now, in Act 2, you reforge a new Sword of Light, which is called the Super Sword of Light. Okay, I guess that is the one that shatters, right? But it's not the Supreme Sword of Light. It's the Super Sword of Light. There's a difference. It's Act 3 where you don't have to, but you can make the Supreme Sword of Light. The Super Sword of Light is actually still more important because using it as an item in the final battle against Kalasmos is what dispels his shield, just like using the Ball of Light in Dragon Quest III dispels Zoma's shield and takes an incredibly difficult boss and makes it just kind of hard. So there's, like I said, there's the Sword of Light, which you never get to use. You get to use the Sword of Shadows, which is the corrupted Sword of Light, but you never get to use the regular Sword of Light. Now, when you create the Super Sword of Light, you need to make the Sword of Kings first, and then use a special metal called orichalcum and a special hammer at a special forging place. It's a whole thing to reforge the Sword of Kings into the Super Sword of Light. That's the one that shatters and becomes the Zenithian sword. The Supreme Sword of Light is in the new timeline. So where You basically do the reforging all over again, but you make the Supreme Sword of Light. So there you have it.
The time jump.
And by the way, the difference is that all of the Luminary's companions all had a play in making it. They all forged it together, but there was one that was not there. She had died. But in the third act, everybody's there, which is probably why the sword is the Supreme Sword of Light.
And then later reforged into the Zenithian sword many years later. I mean,
you can see the similarities.
They look very similar. This is actually somewhat believable. The Supreme Sword of Light looks closer to the Zenithian sword than it does the Sword of Erdrick. It almost feels like this was intentional, just to fuck with the fans.
I don't think it was to fuck with the fans. I think it was to just give us a little like continuity nod, and like the people that would understand what's going on would be like, I see what you did there.
The second proposed timeline is the one that the Luminary goes back to, where he saves the world early on and defeats the true final boss. This is the ending where he earns the title of Erdrick and starts a new line of heroes. I think it's pretty obvious that this timeline leads to the events of 3, which leads to 1, 2, 4, and 8 as well.
1, 2, 4, and 8? I mean, clearly, 3, 1, 2, 7 is what you have on screen. 4 is over here. 8 is not anywhere on this graphic. 8 would be in Erdrick's timeline somehow because of Imperia, but 4 definitely not.
So far, we have 2 potential timelines. First, the hero.
I don't think I caught that the first time I watched that.
The Luminary disappears, leading to 6, then 4, then 5. And then
he said 4.
The hero timeline, where the Luminary defeats the true final boss, leading to 3, then 1, then 2, then 7.
You got it right that time.
And 8 fits somewhere in there. I don't really know exactly where.
It doesn't
matter. Then you have 9 and 10, and nobody seems to know where these ones fit in.
Well, it's interesting that he says nobody seems to know when they fit in, when he showed a graphic, the Twitter post early on, that showed a very plausible one. It is the theory that I go with, that this is Serenica's new timeline.
Are they part of the Zenithian saga? Are they part of the Erdrick saga? Or is there a third
saga
timeline branching off 11? Who can tell? You know, it's amazing how simple the timeline started and how convoluted it eventually.
Well, there you can see it even says Hero-less timeline, Mordegon-less timeline, and Serenica timeline. Dragon Quest Monsters is, it is sort of its own thing for the first. Well, this is actually not Dragon Quest Monsters. It looks like it says Dragon Quest Monsters 1, 2, and 3, but this is Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 1, 2, and 3, and they very much are their own thing. But like Dragon Quest Monsters 1 is really a spinoff of 6, which, do we see that? Yeah, we see it right there. And Dragon Quest Monsters 2, I don't really know where that fits in. Caravan Heart is definitely a spinoff of 7. And then the fourth Dragon Quest Monsters would be Joker. And you can see, they got Young Yangus in there. They got the Builders games, which are alternate versions of 1 and 2. It's kind of really cool showing that. This is a really good timeline. This is pretty much like how I see it.
Eventually got.
Where's 8? I'm curious where this person says 8. So they're saying long after 3, but who knows how it relates to any of these other ones.
We've got prequels.
What is Dragon Quest Saga Emblem of Lodo? Is it like a novel or something? Let me look that up. Come over here. Let's see. Dragon Quest Emblem of... It says it's a manga. Okay. It auto-completed for me. Lodo, whatever you want to call them. I guess this is a sequel to 3 that was told in manga form. Okay. Roto or Lodo is what Erdrick is called in Japanese. Like the name is actually Aris, but the title is Lodo or Erdrick. So come back here.
Sequels, prequels to
right
sequels,
over an hour long,
doing
a reaction and review of a video that's 22 minutes long. So
and games that don't seem to fit anywhere. It's almost like there isn't a timeline, but at the same time, there's.
And that's interesting because it is almost like the developers are saying, you can come up with all the theories you want, have all the fun in the world doing it, but for new people who just want to get into the series and just want to try a game, don't worry about it. Don't get intimidated. It looks daunting. Don't worry about it. Just pick a game that looks good and play it. They're all pretty self-contained.
Many hints and references pointing to one. And if you thought the mainline Dragon Quest games made this timeline overwhelming, we haven't even factored the spin-offs into this. Dragon Quest Monsters stars a younger version of Terry from 6, so it must take place in the Zenithian timeline, and its sequel, Dragon Quest Monsters 2, takes place afterwards. Dragon Quest Builders takes place in an alternate timeline, branching off of one where the hero chooses to side with the Dragon Lord instead of defeating him. And Dragon Quest Builders 2 takes place in an alternate timeline to Dragon Quest 2, making this timeline splinter off even more. And I can't really figure out where some spin-off titles like Dragon Quest Sword fits in. And if that didn't make enough sense, you then have remakes, and here's where it gets really screwed up and downright contradictory. Most games in the series have been remade for newer platforms, and several
all of them
of
except
these
9
remakes add cameos and nods to other Dragon Quest games. Dragon Quest III's remake for the Game Boy Color added Cloud's Gate Citadel from 6 as a bonus dungeon, linking the Erdrick trilogy to the Zenithian trilogy.
Yeah, but it's just a bonus dungeon. It's just for fun. It's not worth like saying, oh my god, you know, like what happened? How does that fit into the canon? It's post-game content. It's not part of the story.
And Dragon Quest VIII's remake for the 3DS added Erdrick's sword from the first 3 games and Estark, a ball.
Well, I mean, we did establish that 8 is in the Erdrick timeline, so that's not all that weird.
Boss from 4 also appears.
Estark's in a lot of games.
If that wasn't enough contradictions for you, Stella, a character from 9, appears in the 3DS version of 8, which makes no sense at all, as 9 takes place in a different world.
Yeah, but Stella's like a fairy creature. She'd probably hop through different dimensions, right? What does it matter? It's just for fun.
So what do we trust? The original versions of the games or the remakes? If we're going with the remakes, well, then you might as well throw out the whole timeline.
And that's kind of the point. It's fun to come up with a timeline, but it doesn't matter. And generally, the remakes, the most recent remakes, are the most canon ones. But that doesn't mean that added content like Stella appearing in, you know, for photos in the photo mode necessarily means that it's in the same timeline as 9 or 10, you know? It's just something for fans to be like, oh, I know this character. As a matter of fact, if you look at Dragon Quest IX and all the DLC that it had, over 700 hours of content, it has characters, you know, villains from just about every game.
It makes no sense.
And so does 11. If you consider the S version, you actually go into, and they call it going into the past, even though like Dragon Quest 11 takes place in the past. They're talking about the past of video games, you know, going into these older games, and you go into Dragon Quest 1 through 10 and do this like long side quest. So it's just for fun.
It's a weird situation. On one hand, there's games in the series that are clearly related to each other and deliberately planned to be part of a unified timeline, being the first 3 games. Then you have a second trilogy of games that are also related to each other,
a little looser,
which is all thrown away when you bring in the standalone games, which have minor references.
It's not thrown
to
away,
the
it's
trilogy.
just...
And then you have games that don't seem to fit anywhere, but have numerous cameos and nods to both trilogies. What this all comes down to is that maybe there isn't some big grand timeline for the Dragon Quest series after all. At first, it really...
Or there is, but it's not that important.
It seems like the creators did plan a single continuity with how deeply connected the first 3 games are, but it's likely they decided to stop making the games so clearly connected after the 3rd game. So
that's exactly what happened.
Fans alike
that's exactly what happened.
They
wanted a little bit more creative freedom
about previous entries. Kind of like how you can basically just hop into any Final Fantasy game without worrying about the other plot lines. And that's exactly how it went for me. My first Final Fantasy game was 3 on Super Nintendo, which was 6 in Japan. And did that matter?
Not a bit, no.
It didn't. I mean, Dragon Quest
6 is also like one of the best ones, so it's like a good one to start with, especially at that time, you know.
Is all about accessibility, and every game is a brand new self-contained adventure with challenging combat, lovable characters, and epic stories that can be enjoyed by anyone, regardless of their history with the franchise.
I think it's the closest we get to a review.
The timeline is left vague on purpose.
On this
so
background.
If you want to get into Dragon Quest, don't worry about some timeline or chronological order or anything. Just pick any of the games and just play it.
And you would wonder, why did James spend 22 minutes talking about the timeline and then say that the timeline doesn't matter? The same reason that I just spent an hour and 15 minutes talking about it and then say it doesn't matter. Because as a huge fan, as a giant Dragon Quest nerd, I have a lot of fun thinking about these and talking about it with other like-minded people. But if somebody is trying to get into the series, I don't want to be like, well, you have to understand this, and this, and that, and, you know, like draw a whole chart for them and bring up an Excel spreadsheet and confuse the shit out of them. At that point, they might as well say, whoa, never mind, you know, I don't want any part of this. I would just say, yeah, just play 11. And people ask me all the time, hey, which Dragon Quest game should I play? Just play 11. Well, I haven't played, you know, any of the other ones. It's cool. It's a prequel anyway. Don't worry about it. Just play 11. It's really good. That's what really matters, because it's, in the end, even though I'm a big Dragon Quest fan, I love talking about this stuff. People who are getting into it just want a good game to play. And maybe they'll get really into it and become fans like I am, or like James has clearly become.
They're all solid.
That's your review. They're all solid. He did mention that he would be doing a review. That's the review. They're all solid. Most of it was timeline stuff. Going back to this was a lot of fun. I remember watching it at the time and liking the video. I remember mostly, though, him saying Scion and Prince Kiefer. But hey, everybody makes mistakes, right? Everybody makes mistakes. I've certainly pronounced things wrong. Some of it because I just made an assumption, or some of it because I had bad information. As a matter of fact, here's one, and this is a game that's getting a re-release real soon. Chrono Cross, well, a remaster, not arguably a remaster. And the main character in that is named Serge. And when I originally did the Let's Play of it years ago, I called him Sergey. Because somebody in the past told me, oh, it's not Serge, it's Sergey. And I took their word for it. Later found out that guy was full of crap. So for many years I was saying the main character is Sergey. He's not Serge, he's Sergey. Which made sense to me because, you know, well, Serge is a name, but it's not a common name. Sergey is a more common name. You know, maybe not in America, but in, you know, certain Eastern European countries, it's a very common name. As a matter of fact, one of my friends has a husband named Sergey. She's married to a Sergey. So it's spelled differently. It's got an I at the end, but, you know, whatever, right? So for the longest time, I believed that because somebody told it to me, and it was something that I felt was believable, and the person seemed to know what they were talking about. Turned out they didn't know what they were talking about, and therefore I didn't know what I was talking about. So, you know, it's fun to, you know, like make fun of James for saying Scion. Maybe he's only ever seen that word written down, and during the process of making this video, nobody told him it was Scion, right? Kiefer is a little weirder because, like, you should know, you know, like from Kiefer Sutherland, that it's Kiefer. It's spelled and pronounced exactly the same. I've never heard anyone say Kiefer, so that one's a little funnier. But, and it's interesting that, you know, coming back to this more than a year later, that's all I really remembered from the video was Kiefer and Scion. And there's a lot of great information there. There's a few things that he got wrong, and I cleared that up, but he's not as up this series' ass as I am. He's new to it. That's understandable. So, there you have it. That's my sort of reaction to and review of James Rolfe's Dragon Quest Timeline video. Hope you enjoyed it. Ugh.